The following program has been made possible solely by your contributions to the American Freedom Coalition. You will be secure in the knowledge that your efforts will be an important factor in protecting our country and our way of life as we know and love it, and will ensure that men like Oliver North can continue to provide that protection.
But the Contras, the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, are people, living, breathing young men and women who have had to suffer a desperate struggle for liberty with sporadic and confusing support from the United States of America. I don't mind telling you that I'm angry at what some have attempted to do to me and my family. I believe that these committee hearings will show that you have struck some blows. But I am going to walk from here with my head high and my shoulders straight, because I am proud of what we accomplished. I am proud of the efforts that we made, and I am proud of the fight that we fought. And I want to tell you that I, for one, will never regret having tried.
In this congressional hearing room, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Oliver North added his name to the list of devoted American heroes dedicated to preserving his country's heritage. Facing a bank of congressmen and government lawyers for 7 days, he courageously defended his actions. The struggle for freedom is not new. It is chronicled in the Bible how Moses led the children of Israel from the bondage of the Pharaohs. Our own country had its beginning as the colonists overthrew their British masters, and almost saw its ending as it became divided over slavery during the Civil War. Only the great patriot had the wisdom to close the breach and preserve unity. As our nation grew greater and stronger, we recalled how close we came to self-destruction over the question of freedom and became committed to preserving it around the world. A generation later, the call was repeated, and our sons answered bravely. Our flag became the symbol of every man's wish to live his life as he chose. The Berlin Wall became the symbol of those who would deny that wish. But along the way, the vision of freedom for all people became clouded. What began as a valiant effort to save a people's dignity and freedom turned into a political disaster for America and a victory for communism. In the hands of the communists, freedom died, and a modern-day Holocaust began. As bad as Dachau, as bad as Auschwitz, as bad as Buchenwald. This erosion of resolve began at the close of World War II. Just as freedom was in the grasp of all the world, our patriots were stopped in their tracks. General George Patton was ordered to halt his march to Berlin to appease the Soviets who wanted to be there first. General Douglas MacArthur, who had liberated the Philippines, was stopped in his tracks 10 years later, just as he was about to free the North Korean people from communist oppression, and was embarrassed into retirement.
Old soldier who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty.
I do know that Douglas MacArthur was and is to this day considered a hero, and yet he was fired by President Truman. So I would say that you don't have to be perfect to be a hero. And one thing is for certain, Colonel Oliver North, you served your country admirably. You have been a dedicated, patriotic soldier, and there's no question you've gone above and beyond on many occasions the call of duty.
We have a new patriot in our midst, and incredible as it seems, we are intent on stopping him.
This nation cannot abide the communization of Central America. We cannot have Soviet bases on the mainland of this hemisphere. And what I worked very hard to achieve was an outcome of democracy in Central America without the use of U.S. military force. There are certainly members of this body and perhaps the rest of the Congress who would feel that we should have used military force, American military force. My effort, and I believe what the President has said on it, is that the worst outcome we could have would be the consolidation of a communist client state in Nicaragua and the spread of communism throughout the region.
What Colonel North said struck a familiar note. 25 years ago, similar thoughts were expressed.
Neither the United States of America nor the world community of nations can tolerate deliberate deception and offensive threats on the part of any nation, large or small.
The second worst outcome would be to have to use American forces. Marines like me and the sons of perhaps many of the members of this committee, my son, and we ought not to have to do that.
Aggressive conduct, if allowed to go unchecked and unchallenged, ultimately leads to war. This nation is opposed to war.
We will, if it comes to that, I'm convinced. But there is an alternative, and the alternative is backing the democratic resistance in Nicaragua.
John Kennedy had reason to stare down the Soviets who posed a communist threat in Cuba. He recalled Hungary and Czechoslovakia. Later, events in Afghanistan would prove him right once more. North reiterated Kennedy's fears.
We have been blessed in this country that we have not seen the kind of terrorism that has been so rampant in the Middle East and in Europe. We have been blessed because, for whatever reason, even in the days of the late 60s and early 70s when there was great political dissension in this country, Americans, by their very nature, thank God, don't believe in those kinds of activities. And so even though there were groups of people who would like to have done more than they did, they were brought to justice and turned in most often by plain old Americans who pick up the phone and call the police or the FBI. We also have, I think, need to be concerned about the future in terrorism. There were more terrorist acts against Americans in this hemisphere in the last few years than there were in the Mideast. A dramatic change in trend. It is coming closer to home, and we need to be wary of that. We need to be concerned that if we don't find a way to address the terrorist threat at arm's distance, we'll be dealing with it when it's right in our face. You're talking about the efforts of the Soviet Union, not on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, but right here in this hemisphere. Hours. I mean, I have flown to Nicaragua in 4.5 hours. I mean, you're not talking about a day's trip like it used to be to go to Vietnam. We are talking about something right next door. That's the major difference.
What, in your view, was the purpose of the massive Soviet investment in Nicaragua?
Well, I think the Soviets have a neat way of doing it. I'm accused of dreaming up neat things. The Soviets, obviously, from what they have said and every indication that we know of, are not willing to go to war over Nicaragua. And in fact, they neatly sidestep the issue, and it's a very clever use of the dialectic. They don't come out and advocate until they're absolutely certain that the revolution is going to succeed, as it did in Cuba. They don't come out and advocate a 100% commitment. What they have done is they have provided a steady and consistent and increasing level of military and economic support to Nicaragua in hopes that their revolution will succeed. And of course, the quotes of the leadership of Nicaragua show them to be truly what they are. In fact, they aren't even Marxists. They are Leninists. They believe deeply in the vanguard of the party. I mean, these are the words that Vladimir Ilyich Lenin used in 1917 and in 1918 when he was taking charge of what was going on in the Soviet Union. These are the same words that Fidel Castro used. And yet, They are always consistent when they approach us here in this country and people who think that they're agrarian reformers or that they're simply labor organizers or Democrats. They're very, very careful to stay away from those terms when they're talking with us. It's an extraordinary experience to see what's going on. The Soviets desperately want to achieve the consolidation of a Soviet client state on the mainland of this hemisphere. It will be disastrous for our foreign policy. If historical precedent is an example, when a communist takeover occurs, between 10 and 25% of the population will flee that country and go to the next nearest democracy. And if that happens throughout Central America, from the Rio Grande to the Panama Canal, you're talking about something in the vicinity of 10 million human beings. Already 10% of the population of Nicaragua has fled. And so when I said yesterday that the Contra, the Nicaraguan democratic resistance, the young men and women who fight today in the fields of Nicaragua, were not a product of Ollie North or Director Casey or even this government. They are a product. They were raised up as an army of opposition by the Sandinistas themselves.
Colonel North, do you have a copy of Exhibit 212 in front of you?
I do.
All right. This exhibit, for the record, is an unclassified document. It's a Defense Intelligence Agency analysis, and the title is Nicaragua, the Military Buildup, July 1979 to 11 January 1985. Now, I take it what this chart shows, Colonel North, is the estimates made by the United States government of the investment by the Soviet Union in Nicaraguan military forces. Is that correct?
My assessment of this is, and I think it was consistent with what others were saying at the time, is that that is a conservative estimate. For example, by 1985, there were probably more than 62,000 in the active force and in the reserves and militia. Given the limited capability for collection, there probably were, by that point in time, well over 62,000.
Now, I take it that this would represent the largest military force anywhere in Central America.
It is
that correct?
Not only the largest in Central America, it is the largest of all Central America combined.
And I take it also represents a force larger than that currently stationed by the United States in South Korea. Is that correct?
That is correct. What it also does not show, Counsel, is the number of Soviet, East German, North Korean, PLO, Libyan, and Cuban advisors, all of whom were there early on. Abu Nidal is, as I'm sure you on the intelligence committees know, the principal foremost assassin in the world today. He is a brutal murderer. Abu Nidal himself quoted in Der Spiegel, "Between America and us, there exists a war to the death. In the coming months and years, Americans will be thinking about us." For sheer viciousness, Abu Nidal has few rivals in the underworld of terrorism. Newsweek, our own State Department, and we have copies of these that we can make available for insertion in the record, but the State Department's summary on Abu Nidal, not exactly an overstatement, notes that his followers, who number an estimated 500, have killed as many as 181 persons and wounded more than 200 in 2 years. Abu Nidal does not deny these things. We also have an exhibit that we can provide for you that shows what Abu Nidal did in the Christmas massacres. One of the people killed in the Christmas massacre, and I do not wish to over-dramatize this, but the Abu Nidal terrorist in Rome who blasted the 11-year-old American Natasha Simpson to her knees, deliberately zeroed in and fired an extra burst at her head, just in case. Gentlemen, I have an 11-year-old daughter. Not perhaps a whole lot different than Natasha Simpson. And as I indicated yesterday, I think it was insensitive of this committee to place before the cameras my home address at a time when my family and I are under 24-hour armed guard by over a dozen government agents of the Naval Investigative Service because of fear that terrorists will seek revenge for my official acts and carry out their announced intentions to kill me. I'll be glad to meet Abu Nidal on equal terms anywhere in the world. Okay? There's an even deal for him. But I am not willing to have my wife and my 4 children meet Abu Nidal or his organization on his terms.
As North's image grew stronger during the week, public opinion in his favor grew to a groundswell. His adversaries attempted to ward off that groundswell by turning to other matters they felt more relevant.
The second one, Exhibit 173, there are 3 letters from the typewriter that don't type correctly. How was that arranged?
It wasn't arranged. That's the way the wheel on the thing was when I typed it. And the wheel was defective. It was simply that way.
Were the 2 letters typed on the same typewriter?
No.
Colonel North has frankly admitted what he did here. I must believe that the United States Congress has better things to do than focus on 2 phony letters after the witness has admitted that they're phony. Could we please move on to another subject?
We will proceed in the fashion we wish to, Mr. Niels.
And Mr. Neal's sarcastically worded question about the shredding of documents literally blew up in his face with North's answer.
Well, that's the whole reason for shredding documents, isn't it, Colonel North? So that you can later say you don't remember whether you had them and you don't remember what's in them.
No, Mr. Niels, the reason for shredding documents and the reason the government of the United States gave me a shredder, I mean, I didn't buy it myself, was to destroy documents that were no longer relevant, that did not apply or that should not be divulged. And again, I want to go back to the whole intent of a covert operation. Part of a covert operation is to offer plausible deniability of the association of the government of the United States with the activity. Part of it is to deceive our adversaries. Part of it is to ensure that those people who are at great peril carrying out those activities are not further endangered. All of those are good and sufficient reasons to destroy documents. And that's why the government buys shredders by the tens and dozens and gives them to people running covert operations, not so that they can have convenient memories. I came here to tell you the truth, to tell you in this committee and the American people the truth, and I'm trying to do that, Mr. Niels, and I don't like the insinuation that I'm up here having a convenient memory lapse like perhaps some others have had.
I want to move to another topic,
Can I,
Colonel?
before we leave that, if we may, Counsel, I believe that the things I did were right, and I believe that the lives of the people with whom I worked needed to be protected. I knew that the successor that was coming in wasn't going to do that. The CIA was now back actively engaged in support of the Nicaraguan resistance. And the names and the addresses and the places and the people with whom I had worked during the period of time in which the CIA was not engaged need not be exposed by anybody. And I want you to know that that was a lot of what was going through my mind.
North's counsel, Brendan Sullivan, then took on his client's inquisitors personally.
Would you have shredded less documents on the 22nd if you had been told that the Attorney General was acting at the specific request of the President, your Commander-in-Chief?
Objection.
What is the basis of your objection,
It's
sir?
pure speculation. Dreamland. It has 2 ifs in it, and Mr. Lyman knows better than most that
May I
those
advise-
kinds of questions, Mr. Chairman, are wholly inappropriate, not just because of rules of evidence, not because you couldn't say it in the court, but because it's just dreamland. It's speculation. He says, if you'd done this, and if you'd done that, and if you'd done that, what about this? Come on, let's have, Mr.
I'm
Chairman,
certain, counsel-
plain fairness. Plain fairness. That's
May I
all we're
speak,
asking
sir?
for.
May I speak?
Yes, sir.
I'm certain counsel realizes that this is not a court of law.
Believe me, I know that.
And I'm certain you realize that the rules of evidence do not apply in this inquiry.
That I know as well. I'm just asking for fairness. Fairness. I know the rules don't apply. I know the Congress doesn't recognize attorney-client privilege, a husband and wife privilege, priest-penitent privilege. I know those things are all out the
We
window,
have attempted
and we
to be
rely
as
on
fair
just
as we
fairness,
can.
Mr. Chairman. Fairness.
Let the witness object if he wishes to.
Well, sir, I'm not a potted plant. I'm here as the lawyer. That's my job.
The committee changed to a new series of unrelated attacks. First, regarding his and his attorney's preparations for the hearing.
We're looking at a book there. What is the book, sir?
The book is made up of notes that I have made in trying to prepare with counsel for this hearing.
And
it includes...
don't tell him what it includes.
Well, I think that if a witness is looking at something, that I, as counsel, am entitled to see what he's refreshing his recollection on.
I think you're wrong. That's a product of lawyers working with clients.
And you think that a witness is entitled to read something and that we're not entitled to see what he's reading?
He's entitled to use his notes and to preserve the attorney-client privilege. Everything in that book is a product of the attorney-client and work product privilege. Mr. Lyman, and you know that.
Are you able to recall your conversation with Admiral Poindexter on the 21st about the diversion without looking at that book?
That's none of your business either. You just ask him the question.
Please address the chair.
Mr. Chairman, let's get to the substance of these hearings and stop trying to get off his back.
We have a PA system here. You need not shout, sir.
Mr.
Please proceed.
Counsel,
Don't answer the question. Next question, Mr. Chairman. It won't be answered.
The Uniform Code makes it abundantly clear that it must be the lawful orders of a superior officer. In fact, it says members of the military have an obligation to disobey unlawful orders. This principle was considered so important that we, the government of the United States, proposed that it be internationally applied in the Nuremberg trials. And so in the Nuremberg trials we said that the fact that the defendant...
May I please register an objection?
Continue my statement?
I find this offensive. I find you're engaging in a personal attack on Colonel North, and you're far removed from the issues in this case. To make reference to the Nuremberg trials, I find personally, professionally, distasteful, and I can no longer sit here and listen to this.
You will have to sit there if you want to listen.
Mr. Chairman, please don't conclude these hearings on this unfair note. I have strong objections to many things in the hearing, and you up there speak about the listening to the American people. Why don't you listen to the American people and what they've said as a result of the last week? There are 20,000 telegrams in our room outside the corridor here that came in this morning. The American people have spoken. And please stop this personal attack against Colonel North.
Next, and unbelievably, they turned to his private life, chipping away, looking for the slightest chink in his armor, starting with lewd hints at an intimate relationship between him and his secretary, Fawn Hall, pointing to a purchase by North at Park Lane Hosiery.
and I want to make it very clear that when you put up things like Park Lane Hosiery, and you all snicker at it, and you know that I've got a beautiful secretary, and the good Lord gave her the gift of beauty, and that people snicker that Ollie North might have been doing a little hanky-panky with his secretary. Ollie North has been loyal to his wife since the day he married her. And the fact is, I went to my best friend and I asked her, did I ever go to Park Lane Hosiery? And you know what she told me? Of course you did, you old buffoon. You went there to buy leotards for our two little girls.
The bonds that exist between Ollie North and his wife are, I think, are unbreakable. There is he always used to call and always calls his wife his best friend. And when I got married and told him that I was about to get married, he said, remember, you're not only taking a wife, you're taking a best friend. And if she's not going to be that, then you should look around. And there's this tremendous love that exists between them. And there's a caring attitude. One of the things that he said when I talked with him, with our lawyers present, he said, one of the great things about this is I get to spend a lot of time with my family for a change, something that over 5 years I hadn't been able to. I think this traumatic episode in his life has brought
he and his family even closer than they were before, if that was possible. There's a unity there, and there's a family spirit there that is magnificent, and is a great example to all of us.
I always found Larry to be an upstanding individual. As a youngster growing up, he was an altar boy. He was very, very likable, very friendly, very amiable. He had that certain charisma about him that attracted people to him.
I sense that he was an advocate of democracy because he was community-minded, ready, especially in student council, to do any of the work that had to be done. You didn't have to be asked twice.
He was a trustworthy youngster growing up, and I've always felt that the child is father to the man. All of the experiences that he had as a youngster certainly helped him as he grew into manhood.
At times, North's discussion of duty, honor, and country seemed to be taken with a tongue-in-cheek attitude by some members of the committee and the press. But to those who served with him, it was truth.
I think most of us who were also over there were somewhat, maybe we considered ourselves sophisticated, that, it's really not this way. But he really believed, for example, he believed in his wife. He loved his wife. He was just all emotionally involved in his wife. He was emotionally involved in the Marine Corps. He was always there in a very positive, duty-oriented sense, that our nation requires our services, that it's our turn to provide our country with our duty, with our honor.
He's the kind of guy that he took charge of situations. He had a persona about him of command. Like I say, you didn't have to know he was an officer or anything. You took orders from him automatically.
I would have to say that as far as in combat, that I don't know of anybody who's his equal, and I've seen quite a few. I've seen quite a few police officers since then, and I would have to characterize North as one of the bravest men I ever knew.
I'm from Oklahoma, and in southeastern Oklahoma, we like to wave the flag every day. If we can, every day. Ollie would be a good Okie. He likes to wave the flag. He cares about his country.
The real heroes of Vietnam were the scruffy kids drug off the street corners, not necessarily the ones, the generals that led them into battle. And it was quite the common thought amongst us lieutenants that these kids were really performing, and yet the Congress either didn't care, couldn't understand, or didn't want to understand. And the American people were being misled by the media and by the Congress.
And North drew an obvious comparison.
Plain and simple, the Congress is to blame because of the fickle, vacillating, unpredictable, on-again, off-again policy toward the Nicaraguan democratic resistance, the so-called Contras. The Congress of the United States allowed the executive to encourage them to do battle and then abandon them. The Congress of the United States left soldiers in the field unsupported and vulnerable to their communist enemies. When the executive branch did everything possible within the law to prevent them from being wiped out by Moscow's surrogates in Havana and Managua, you then had this investigation to blame the problem on the executive branch. It does not make sense to me.
As the hearings wore on, the government side began to realize that North indeed would emerge another great patriot. New tactics were brought into play to dilute the colonel's testimony, like alibis about technical difficulties preventing him from showing his much-discussed slide presentation, which backed up his testimony.
To have a slideshow in this room, it will necessitate the darkening of this room. TV lights are such that the slideshow cannot be seen by anyone. Therefore, the slideshow will not be seen by the people of the United States.
I believe what you say, but I find that those people in charge of the technological aspects of this room should be able to create a situation such that slides can be shown on television. I've had hearings for 9.5 years or 9 years as a member of the House, and
And many of those slide programs are picked up on TV. I just find it remarkable that for somehow it can't be done here.
And the only way I'm going to know is that Colonel North has an opportunity to express himself and to show what he did, and to do it basically the way he did it to thousands of people, as I recall his testimony. I think it's unfair if we don't do that, and I think it's unfair to the American people if we don't do it right here.
North described them nonetheless, and the pictures can now be shown, as they should have been then.
The first slide shows the effect of Soviet penetration in this hemisphere in the form of a consolidated communist regime in Cuba, and the threat that poses to our sea lines of communication, both to Europe and through the Panama Canal, and the threat it poses to 55% of our oil supplies coming up from Latin America. The second slide is a photograph of Andrei Gromyko, then the foreign minister of the Soviet Union, and a quote from Mr. Gromyko to the effect that he said in Moscow in 1983, "The region is boiling like a cauldron." A second quote from Marshal Ogorkov. The Marshal said that over 2 decades ago there was only Cuba in Latin America. Today there are Nicaragua, Grenada, and a serious battle is going on in El Salvador, a 1983 pronouncement by Marshal Ogorkov. There is then a summary of Soviet policy in the region based on Soviet literature, and summarized that their goal is to create such turmoil in the Caribbean basin that the United States must divert attention and military resources from areas critical to the Soviets. A follow-on slide depicts the fact that the Soviets are outspending us in our own hemisphere on a ratio of about 5-to-1. A photograph showing the Soviet warships deployed in the Caribbean, what used to be referred to as an American lake, 16 miles off the coast of Louisiana. A photograph of a U.S. Navy F-4 escorting a Soviet Bear F strategic reconnaissance aircraft 13 miles off the coast of the Virginia Capes, and then a photograph taken by a U.S. reconnaissance platform of the Soviet military facility at San Antonio de los Baños in Cuba. It is that facility which allows the Soviets to recover their reconnaissance aircraft which fly down the east coast of the United States. The next slide shows the growth of the active duty forces in the Sandinista military machine, an enormous military buildup supported by the Soviet Union. The next series of slides shows some of the military equipment on which I've already been questioned, but it shows the T-55 tanks now numbering over 150, the PT-76 tanks and the armored personnel carriers numbering over 300, an aerial reconnaissance platform photograph of Punta Huete, the largest airfield south of the Rio Grande, bigger than Andrews Air Force Base, which is capable of launching and receiving any aircraft in the Soviet inventory, to include the reconnaissance aircraft shown in the earlier slides, allowing them to reconnoiter the west coast of the United States. The first of them shows one of the Mi-8 HIP helicopters. Delivered originally as agricultural support equipment, it shows some of the unique agricultural support uniforms and, of course, the party emblem next to the agricultural rocket launcher on the side of the aircraft. The next photograph is the Soviet Hind helicopter, the most sophisticated assault platform in the world today. It has been delivered by the dozens to the Sandinistas, assembled by Soviet technicians and test flown by them, is flown by Cuban and Nicaraguan pilots against the resistance and to intimidate their neighbors. There's also a photograph of a Soviet AN-30 reconnaissance aircraft flown by Soviets in this hemisphere, not Cubans, not Nicaraguans. The Minister of Defense in Nicaragua is the brother of El Presidente, Daniel Ortega. Humberto has said, Marxism-Leninism is the scientific doctrine that guides our revolution. Our doctrine is Marxism-Leninism. And he said that in August of 1981. And what he is saying in every other word is that communism is what they want. 1984, the great political thinker, the Che Guevara in many respects of the current revolution in Nicaragua. Tomas Borge, the Minister of Interior. He doesn't run the national parks, he runs the secret police. You cannot be a true revolutionary in Latin America without being a Marxist-Leninist, said in Havana in 1984. And then 2 photographs of Mr. Ortega and some of his associates, one with Fidel Castro, and then with some of his other brothers in arms, in this case, the leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. Then a photograph that starts a series on what has happened to the people of Nicaragua. A photograph of one of the 11 new political prisons inside Nicaragua. A photograph of one of the victims with his arms and face terribly burned from having been truss-bound, thrown into his Pentecostal church and set afire while he was alive. And he managed to push himself out of the church. A photograph from a Nicaraguan school book printed in East Germany or Cuba, showing how young Nicaraguan children learn to count by counting grenades and AK-47. And of course the textbooks talk about anti-imperialism and anti-Americanism. A series of photographs showing the dislocation of the Mosquito Indians, 25,000 to 30,000 of which have been driven from tribal homelands across the border into Costa Rica and Honduras, bringing with them their entire culture. Left alone for hundreds of years, these people no longer can go home. Then some photographs showing the Nicaraguan resistance. It shows the young men and women who have taken up arms because they've been denied any other recourse in their own country. It shows the 57-year-old coffee farmer who I described earlier, who came home and found his entire family murdered by the Sandinistas because they gave water to a passing Contra patrol. A photograph showing the leadership of the FDN. And in that photograph of 16 men, 11 of them are former Sandinistas. Another one of a patrol deep inside Nicaragua. A photograph of a wounded resistance soldier who benefited from the support that we provided during the cutoff. And then finally a photograph showing the grave of a resistance fighter. And the conclusion of the briefing is, gentlemen, that we've got to offer them something more than the chance to die for their own country and the freedoms that we believe in. Thank you, sir.
Oliver North, in 5 days of testimony, did more to show the American people what is at stake in Central America than the United States State Department has done in 6 years of trying to convince the American people.
I don't want to see a godless, atheistic, communist regime in power down in Central America. Therefore, I have to cry out for justice and equality.
I believe in the Contra cause. I believe in what's happening, what you believe, Lieutenant Colonel North. I believe that you were fighting for correct principles and for this hemisphere and against what really is a deleterious force.
I'm all for him.
I think he's a man of God. I think he's a hero. I think that the man is a hero. I think that he has proved to the Congress that the American people really do support the Contras.
From what I've seen so far, I'd say he's probably one of the most patriotic people that this country's seen in quite some time.
Where has communism stopped? Why would communism be contented with a couple of little nations in Central America? Isn't it obvious that the broader purpose is to cut off the United States?
We must help the freedom fighters now because they're fighting not only for their own freedom and the freedom of their country, but for our freedom as well.
I mean, I think every American knows where Mexico is, and that's where the eyes of Marxism are. Every American knows where the Panama Canal is, and that's where the Marxist eyes are. It's not Nicaragua or El Salvador. It's a much larger area that they're after, and it obeys a pattern, a historical pattern of Marxist expansionism.
They want us to have to spend our resources, the blood and the guts of American young men south of the Mexican-American border, so we'll have to withdraw our resources from other parts of the world, such as the Middle East and NATO.
This country cannot stand that, not just because of Nicaragua, but because of all the other nations in the world who look at us and measure by what we do now in Nicaragua the measure of our whole commitment to their cause, to things like NATO, to things like our commitment to peace and democracy elsewhere in the world. How far would we have gotten with the efforts of Dr. Segur in Korea just weeks ago if they didn't really believe that we really wanted democracy? And how long will the people all around the rest of the world who rely on us abide by us and stand with us if they don't believe that we want democracy enough just a few hundred miles from our own borders.
I'm alive today. I'm also free today because of a man like Oliver North. A man who has a philosophy of do it now. He's a risk taker. He had the courage to try. And I met with Colonel North shortly after my release, and I had an opportunity to talk with him for many hours. And he wrote on the brim of this cap, "David, I would have despaired unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." Psalm 27, verse 13. The one thing I really pray for is that Oliver North will be a free man like he made it possible for me to be free. To be sitting outside today, seeing the horizon, smelling the fresh air, and just being a free American. Ollie did that for me, and I would hope that his rights will never be taken from him either.
Colonel North, I would like to direct your attention to an exhibit on the wall here, one that you had seen before from that other vantage point. It's the first one. It's entitled Public Law 98-473, October 12, 1984. It's the Boland Amendment, one of the 5 versions that was in effect then. And at the bottom of that exhibit is the signature of Thomas P. O'Neill, Speaker of the House, Strom Thurmond, President Pro Tem of the Senate, and the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. Do you see that up there?
I do, sir.
Now that was presented to you the other day to make a point. And the point was that the President signed the Boland Amendment, that it is the law, and the President signed it. And of course, if the President signs it, why, who are we not to observe it, because it's a law? Now, I was taken aback when I saw that, because the purpose, it seemed to me, was to convey the impression that the President was sitting at his desk and someone put the Boland Amendment in front of him, and he said, "My God, give me my pen, I want to sign the Boland Amendment." Because that's a phony, that's a fabrication, that's contrived. The Boland Amendment is a couple of pages in this. This is the way it appeared to the President. It was brought to him 12 days after the fiscal year was over. The operations of government would have to close down if he didn't sign this. There were military appropriations, Social Security money, the Department of Interior. The Navy would have to bring the ships back to the dock and say to the sailors, "Hitchhike home." We have no money. We have no money. So we have to sign. Mr. President, you got to sign this. Now, if we can't ignore the law or exempt ourselves from it, we play games with the process. Do you know how we got our pay raise? Now, the senators voted no. Terrific. And by the way, thank God we got the pay raise. I'm happy. I need the money, and I earn the money. But you know what we did in the House? We waited under the guidance of the stage director over there, the Speaker, till 30 days had elapsed until it was vested. It could not be unvested, and then we got a vote on it. We waited till it was locked in, and then we voted, and we could all tell our constituents, I didn't vote for that pay raise. That's the way we do things. So there's much to be learned from watching us. But having said that, I think a few more points need to be made. Now, why was this different? Why did you have to lie to Congress? Why was this different from other covert actions? Well, you know, it's very simple when you have a covert action that everybody agrees with. Isn't that correct? When you get a controversial one, then you have a whole different problem. Is that not so?
It is.
And so the notion of betraying freedom fighters bothers you, whether they're at the Bay of Pigs or whether we're taking off from the roof of the embassy at Saigon on April 25th, 1975, or whether leaving them to fend for themselves in the mountains of Nicaragua. So you've got a few more mountains to climb, Colonel North, but remember, everybody remembers Billy Mitchell and nobody remembers who his prosecutors were.
My own personal sense is that I would have the greatest burden of all on my soul if what I have done or what I have failed to do as a consequence of supporting the resistance from 1984 to the resumption of U.S. assistance in 1986 resulted in a cutoff at this point. And I would beg you, gentlemen, all, that the cause of the Nicaraguan resistance is our own, and that regardless of whether you judge me to be right or wrong, that what we have done is we have decided once again with $100 million to support a cause that is just. We have decided to again support an army in the field and a political outcome of democracy in Nicaragua. And that if, as a result of what you deem me to have done wrong, you decide to stop that again, that will be compounding a tragedy. And I'm not trying to make a speech, Congressman Cheney. I'm making an appeal. Hang whatever you want around the neck of Ollie North, and I have a few millstones that I have laid before you. And I have tried to do so fully and honestly, as difficult as some of that may be. And it has been difficult. But for the love of God and the love of this nation, don't hang around Ollie North's neck the cutoff of funds to the Nicaraguan resistance again. We've got to offer them something more than the chance to die for their own country and the freedoms that we believe in. I'll be glad to meet Abu Nidal on equal terms anywhere in the world. Okay? I came here to tell you the truth, to tell you in this committee and the American people the truth, and I'm trying to do that, Mr. Niels, and I don't like the insinuation that I'm up here having a convenient memory lapse like perhaps some others have had. The cause of the Nicaraguan resistance is our own. We need to be concerned that if we don't find a way to address the terrorist threat at arm's distance, we'll be dealing with it when it's right in our face. Sort of like a baseball game in which you are both the player and the umpire. It's a game in which you call the balls and strikes, and where you determine who is out and who is safe. And in the end, you determine the score and declare yourselves the winner. But the Contras, the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, are people, living, breathing young men and women who have had to suffer a desperate struggle for liberty with sporadic and confusing support from the United States of America. I would simply like to thank the American people who have responded with their good wishes, their support, their prayers through what has been for me and my family a long and difficult ordeal. I thank them for that, and I salute them.
The American Freedom Coalition is dedicated to the preservation of liberty and human dignity throughout the length and breadth of the land. Every American who believes in these principles deserves to see this program. If you wish to see it shown on national television, to add your voice to the outrage that is building against those who threaten to convict one of history's great patriots for the simple act of protecting his country, please write to American Freedom Coalition, P.O. Box 96468, Washington, D.C. 20077. That's American Freedom Coalition, P.O. Box 96468, Washington, D.C. 20077.